In the last lecture on mentoring, I mentioned the story of Jeannie, the receptionist whom I empowered to, take on the phone system for the company. And the experience, I have to say, was a win for both of us. I learned about how to empower my employees. That's when I really first began to understand this principle. And Jeannie came away feeling proud and confident in her abilities, knowing that she had made a significant contribution to the organization, a contribution that senior management, in fact, acted upon. Well, most people want to do more than collect a paycheck. I really, I learned that in part with Jeannie. They want to know that they're doing meaningful work that's making a difference to their customers, organization, even society. And that's what empowerment, when I talk about employee empowerment, is all about. It's expanding the scope of what people do, as well as giving them the authority and the resources and the autonomy that they need to do their work. Well, one way we do this is by involving people in special projects or initiatives, kind of like I did with Jeannie. What she did was outside the normal definition of her job. Another way to do it is to actually expand the scope of a person's job to include more coordinating responsibilities. Here's a diagram that shows what I mean. As you can see, the circle on the inside represents the core work of an employee, that work for which an employee was hired and which results in a deliverable to a customer. The outside circle represents coordinating work, work that is not core, in other words, doesn't result in a deliverable to a customer, but which has to be accomplished or performed for people to do their core work. Well, in lots of organizations, much of this work is done by a supervisor or manager rather than team member. However, your team becomes more empowered the more of these responsibilities they take on. They help them feel like they're not just doing a job, but they're making a more meaningful contribution. So take a look at my list, and then think about the nature of the work of your team and come up with a list of responsibilities that fit with your team. You might think of some of these responsibilities as something that is shared by the whole team. For example, everybody's responsible for troubleshooting and solving problems when and where they occur. Or everybody is responsible for, let's say, quality or customer satisfaction. But many of these responsibilities are such that they will also need to be done by one or more members of the team whom you commission and empower. So here's a chart I'd like you to take a look at. And I want to ask you to complete this chart, build a chart that looks like this. You're going to be doing three things. In the first column, you're going to make a list of coordinating responsibilities that could potentially be done by members of your team. Second, for each of these responsibilities, indicate whether you would consider it to be beginning, intermediate, or advanced. I'm talking about the middle column here. Indicate, is it beginning, intermediate, or advanced? And third, identify some people who could potentially be trained now or in the future to take on this responsibility. And by the way, these do not need to be considered permanent responsibilities. Somebody may take on a responsibility now and somebody else the same responsibility in the future. People can rotate so that different people have an opportunity to do them and learn and grow. You have to decide what makes most sense for your team. Well, once you begin to identify initiatives and responsibilities that your team members could do, the next step is to empower them. Empowerment doesn't just happen on its own or because people are given a new role, a new title, and new responsibilities. In fact, that's the mistake that we so often make. It's the mistake I made with Jeannie. I want to share with you 6 elements of empowerment and an empowerment process that you can go through to make sure that you're giving people what they need, equipping them with whatever they need to really be successful in taking on more responsibility. As you become more familiar, I would recommend that you begin with the beginning responsibilities as you actually begin to implement this process. And then as people become more familiar with the idea and you've had a little experience with the idea, you can move on to the intermediate and the advanced responsibilities. So step 1, clarify the responsibilities. The first thing that people need is a good definition of the responsibilities that they're going to assume. And you know, I don't do this in a real elaborate way. Make a bullet list that includes the tasks and any of the responsibilities that you want them to perform as part of this new assignment. Step 2, identify boundary conditions. This is such a critical step and the one that we usually forget. These, when I say boundary conditions, are the parameters within which people will fulfill their responsibilities. As a leader, you're not just giving them a blank slate, but you're providing them some guidance and some sideboards, so to speak, within which they'll go to work. And this includes such things as the following: expectations and results. What are the expectations or the desired results of this particular role or this particular responsibility? And these can be listed as qualitative or quantitative. Non-negotiables. What is out of bounds? Non-negotiables define any givens or limits that can't be crossed in fulfilling a responsibility. For example, let's suppose that a person takes on doing some scheduling or scheduling vacations. They have to comply with the company's existing personnel policies. Budget is another boundary condition. How much money is needed and allocated for this project or this set of responsibilities? You want to make this clear from the start. Authority. How much authority should a person have in an area of responsibility? An authority is the level of autonomy that one has in carrying out a task. And there are 4 levels of authority, and how much authority one has depends on their experience, their motivation, and capability. Level 1 is to act when directed. Level 2 is to act after approval. Level 3 is to act and report. And level 4 is to act autonomously. And a final boundary condition is time. You have to set some time guidelines. What are the constraints that guide the task? And this generally consists of milestone events or completion of certain projects. Could also include how much time an individual may spend with this on a weekly basis, or even the length of time that a person assumes a particular role. So those are the boundary conditions that you have to clarify. Step 3 is to identify the knowledge and information requirements for this particular role. What knowledge or information must people have access to in order to succeed? In many organizations, managers take for granted the knowledge or information that they have, but others don't. So it's essential for you to identify these needs in order to fulfill or empower someone. Step 4, identify required skills. What skills do people need to successfully take on new responsibilities? For example, they may need to learn new software, or how to read a budget, or even enter data into a particular software program or into a computer. Step 5, provide resources. What financial, technical, or organizational resources are available for people to fulfill their responsibilities? And these can include tools and equipment, as well as reports, technical experts, and so on. Step 6, finally, offer ongoing support. What kind of support does an individual require while learning a new responsibility? Support is being available to talk as necessary. It's also letting them know that you trust in their ability to handle a task, that it's even okay for them to make mistakes. Well, hopefully you can see from these steps that empowerment is so much more than delegation. In delegation, somebody carries out a task as directed by another without necessarily feeling any sense of ownership. Empowerment, on the other hand, means that people take on the ownership, and we prepare them to do so by following these 6 steps that I've just given you. So here's an empowerment matrix, which I use to think through and operationalize these elements of empowerment. I'm giving this to you and the other charts as resources that you can use. They're part of this lesson. And in the meantime, notice how this chart, this matrix, I should say, organizes the 6 elements of empowerment into a nice format that you can fill out as you're talking to people, as you're talking to an individual or as a group of people about taking on additional responsibilities. You can use the matrix on your own to think through the elements of empowerment, and best if you use it as a basis for a conversation with the person or the people whom you want to empower. You can work through it together. You can actually fill it out together. Well, I call this an empowerment dialogue. The purpose is to set this person up for success by making sure that they understand exactly what you're asking them to do and that they have everything they need to succeed. Be aware as you empower people and have these conversations that your employees are at very different levels of readiness, and you have to use your judgment about how much they can take based on their maturity, their experience, as well as their willingness. So let me summarize this lecture by saying that there's tremendous value that comes from employee empowerment, expanding the scope of what people do. Not only can you get more done as a leader, but you're developing your most important resource, your people. Through empowerment, you give people the opportunity to grow and contribute to your team and organization in more meaningful ways. Doing this helps them feel more ownership and make a greater mental and emotional investment in the organization. It's what employee engagement is all about. See you in the next lecture.